Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Fitzpatrick. I'm the shepherd, which is what we call the president of the Lambs. I want to welcome you to our online chat today. For those who don't know, the Lambs started in 1874. We're a social club in New York City, the oldest professional theatrical organization in the United States. If you want to know more about us, I'll put a link in the chat window to find out more about the club. Love to have you join us for those of you that aren't members of the Lambs yet. And I'm going to turn it over to Lamb Foster Hirsch, professor, author, and I will put a link to Foster in the chat window too, because he has a lot of really wonderful books about film and show business. I know you guys are going to want to take a look at. Foster, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Let me put this in perspective, what we're doing tonight. We are talking with the Oscar-nominated co-star of one of the greatest movies ever made. The film was released 73 years ago. It was made 74 years ago. And here is Nancy Olson, better known as Betty Shaffer, to talk to us. This is so exciting to us film fans. Nancy, we are thrilled to have you with us. Really, it is an honor.
I'm delighted to be here.
An honor. I want to ask you, because we'll talk about Sunset Boulevard, of course, but I want to let everybody know that you're the author of a really terrific book, Nancy Olson Livingston, A Front Row Seat. It is a delicious, and it's a kind of a tell-all book. I don't know you, but I can tell from the book, you're very frank.
Yes.
You tell it like it is. Is that your Midwestern roots? I suspect
It is absolutely my Midwestern roots.
I mean, you tell it like it is.
There's no other way.
There's no other way. But I want to start with the fabulous and always glorious, forever important Sunset Boulevard. When you see Betty Shaffer now, 73 years later, do you recognize that young woman on the screen?
Actually, I do. It's interesting. The reason I was cast in that role was because Billy Wilder wanted me to be me. I was under contract to Paramount. I was a student at UCLA, and he would stop me on the lot. I would explore and visit the various sets and what was going on. It was fascinating. I'd never seen anything like it. And I'd read about it, but I'd not experienced it. And he would stop me on the lot and ask me what it was like to grow up as a doctor's daughter in the Midwest. What is it like at UCLA? What are you learning? What are they teaching? How did you spend your summers when you were growing up? What did your mother do? I mean, these were questions that were odd when you think about it, but I answered them with total honesty and told him exactly what he wanted, or not what he wanted to hear, but what was true. And when I was cast in the role, he even wanted me to wear my own clothes. And I did not have a great wardrobe at that time. I mean, I'd grown up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I spent my first year at the University of Wisconsin. I didn't even know where to shop. I mean, Los Angeles was mysterious to me, and I didn't have time. And what I realized is eventually I got it. He simply wanted me to be me. Betty Shaffer was an aspiring writer. Did I sound like I could possibly be interested in writing?
Obviously, yes.
And so he never corrected me when we were rehearsing. And by the way, Billy had a habit of always printing the first take. Now, that can drive you crazy. I mean, Shirley MacLaine has talked about it, because you always feel a little on edge in that first take. You'd like to do it again. And I always ask, couldn't we do this again?
I don't follow directions.
And he'd
But-
say, no, print.
But Nancy, when
Because you can't
Billy
follow
Wilder
directions
was
for a while.
asking you, somebody needs to be muted. When he was asking you these questions, did you realize you were being auditioned for a role, or was it under the guise of he was just being friendly and talking to you?
Believe me, I had no idea. I had no idea that there was a script called Sunset Boulevard in the making. And so when they called me and said, you're going to be in Billy Wilder's next film, this Sunset Boulevard, I was fascinated. I said, are you sure? And they
Those
said,
questions
yes.
were your audition. The questions were your audition.
The questions for my audition was, who are you? Where did you come from? And let me hear what you have to say about it.
Did you ever read from the script in a traditional audition, or never?
No, I never auditioned.
You never auditioned.
No.
That was your audition.
That was my audition.
That was your audition. He wanted something so natural and authentic, and that's what
Yes.
he got.
Yes.
That is
yes.
what he got. That's why that performance lives on forever. It is just so true. Were you playing yourself, basically?
Well, he wanted me just to read the lines and perform the way I would perform. And he never colored it with any nuance. He just wanted that. Now, you have to understand that Betty Shaffer is a tragic figure, as well as an interesting, aspiring writer. She is an opportunist. She wants Joe Gillis, Bill Holden, to help her, make her a successful writer.
Because she doesn't think she can do it on her own.
She feels that she's not quite able to do it on her own. And she has read what he has written, and she liked it. And she sensed that he could
She has to have surgery.
deliver
She's out of the
something
play.
to
doesn't
what
have
she was
surgery.
writing
They
and
put a
make her
bandage
dreams
on her
come
so she would be
true.
in the show.
And of course, what happened is that Betty Shaffer falls in love with a man who's already sold his soul for survival. So it's a tragedy all the way around.
But I've always wanted to ask Betty Shaffer this question. Did Betty Shaffer make the right decision in leaving Joe, or could she have stayed with him and saved him?
I think she understood that it was too late. He had already made a decision, and this was when he became an honorable human being. He wanted me to face the truth.
Yes.
And he was going to go back to his hometown. He could not deliver a life for me, a future for me. He had to say goodbye.
Would if you had been placed in that position, is that a decision you would have made about this man?
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know.
I know that when I say to him and I turn away and say, I can't look at you, there's a realization within me, in my character, that it's over. The tragedy has happened. And what I have done to myself is, it's over.
But that's
Stone?
such a powerful moment, because you realize she's made a decision that will have an impact on the rest of her life.
Oh,
It's a
absolutely.
decision.
I'm reading a
It's
book on the
turning
train on
point.
my laptop called.
There was no way. There was no way for me to persuade him. Now, wait a minute. I'll go back to Kansas City or wherever it was, Des Moines. We'll figure this out. Oh, no. It was over.
It was over. And she recognizes that. And almost
Absolutely.
without any dialogue, it has to be something that comes from within.
Yes.
Something, and you
And
portray
when I say I cannot look at you, I can't face what has happened and what I've done to myself and what you've done to yourself.
Have you ever thought, Nancy, what happens to Betty after the film is over?
That's an interesting question.
Isn't it?
I've never been asked that. And I think that there's a period of recovery and realization. And I never really thought of that. Interesting.
Isn't that? I've thought of that. She's such a wonderful character. But you mentioned she's a tragic figure, but one is so sympathetic to her. And what's remarkable about this film is you feel sympathy for each of the four principal characters.
Yes.
There are no villains. There are
No.
really no villains.
But we're all actually victims of the human qualities, my self-ambition and needing to make it happen.
Yes.
And for Joe Gillis, he was at the end of his line. He was losing everything. His rent, he couldn't live in his apartment anymore. He couldn't drive a car anymore. And so he sold his soul just to survive.
And
And
one
realize-
feels sorry for him. He's a man at the end. One feels
Yes.
very
Oh,
sorry.
yes.
And of
yes.
course, Norma Desmond is the tragic.
But it's
figure.
too late. The consequences are taking
It's too
place.
late. Let me ask about your co-stars. You mentioned in the book that, in fact, when you were cast in the film, you did not know who Gloria Swanson was. Your mother had to fill you in.
Yes, I had no idea.
I had no idea.
And my mother told me all about her. And then I began to realize actually what this script was about. And one of the things that it tells you about is that films create stars, and stars are commodities. They are things to sell, so that they exaggerate that you're not only beautiful,
video
you're
quality these days,
incredibly
so it's,
beautiful.
Really up their
It is-
game.
Excuse me?
Yeah, somebody has to mute yourself, sir. Somebody has to mute your sound on.
You can't hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
This film, its power, it is that it tells the truth. That movie stars were commodities to sell. Marilyn Monroe is the perfect example. She was made more beautiful, more sexy, more everything. And her vulnerability, by the way, just fit in because she wanted to be portrayed as all of those things. So I began to realize while I was making the film, did I want to be a movie star? I came from the Midwest. I assumed that one day I would be married. I would have children. I would have grandchildren. I would run a home. I would be a hostess. I would be a partner. And I also looked at other movie stars at that time. Were they happy? Did they have happy marriages? Happy families? No, very few.
So was Sunset Boulevard almost a life lesson for you?
Yes.
It was
absolutely.
that. It was
It
that.
It was.
It was that. But Gloria Swanson, who was so brilliant in the film, was often thought to be simply playing herself. Not true at all.
No.
Gloria Swanson was a very sane, grounded woman.
Oh, very.
Wasn't Norma Desmond.
No. But she knew what this was about because she'd been thrown away too.
She'd been
She
thrown
got
away.
to a certain age and they said, we don't have a role for you now.
She'd been thrown away, and this was her comeback. But she
Yes,
wasn't
and she
on it.
knew that, by the way. She
knew
knew that
that?
she knew she would never, ever be forgotten
because of this film.
because of the film.
Because of this film. Did you get
And
to
she-
know her at all? Because you had no scenes except the phone conversation.
On the phone, yes.
On phone.
It was clear to me that she was the one, she was so focused. She wanted to be that character. She wanted to portray it. And it, by the way, you could, if you went over the edge in that portrayal of Norma Desmond, you could go into high camp and be
I know those
ridiculous.
fuckers. Those are the parade guys.
Okay, somebody please mute
Idiots.
yourself. Somebody's
Idiots.
interfering.
I have no idea. Somebody,
We don't know one of our many listeners.
oh, it's okay.
Okay, it's not us.
There's
I can hear
nobody
you
here.
fine. Continue, Nancy, we hear you.
Well, Norma Desmond knew that she would never be forgotten again. And she also knew that this film was powerful and that nobody would be forgotten. Of all the people working on the film, she was the one that knew.
She had the
And
sense
also-
of what the film would be thought of
It
all
would-
these years later.
None of us would be forgotten. And by the way, Billy Wilder, he did two beautiful films before he went into the army. He did Our Town and Golden Boy
William Holden.
and
Yeah.
and Bill Holden. And he
Yeah.
was really on the verge of being a major film star. But then he went into the army for how many years? 3 to 4 years, came back, and he was now playing, it was the very kind of minor roles. There was no role that really gave Bill the chance to say, this is what I can do. This is who
But
I
this
am.
is almost a comeback for him, even though he was a young man of 30. It was
Absolutely.
sort of a comeback. And a
I
chance
mean,
for him
he
to prove
knew
himself.
that not only that, but he knew that working with Billy Wilder, that they were going to have a relationship. And of course, he did Stalag 17. Is
And got
that it?
the Oscar, yes.
He got the Oscar. I mean, his career just soared after that.
But one of the many frank things you say in the book was that William Holden had a drinking problem, and you
Oh, yes.
sensed it, and you sensed it very early on, and that he was struggling even then as a young man. He was struggling.
Yes. Well, he was not in a good marriage. He had children. He was worried about his life and his role in the world and his career. And he did have a problem with alcohol for his whole life. He did.
How would it have been if Montgomery Clift had played the part? Because I believe he was taken seriously for the part and actually offered it and turned it down. It
Yes.
would have been a very different film.
Yes. Well, first of all, one of the reasons he turned it down is that he was living with an older woman at the time. And he understood this character is very complicated. And he did not want to be exposed in any way.
But also, Montgomery Clift had a fragility
Mm.
that William Holden didn't have. William
No.
Holden is tougher skinned, and that works for the part. And he's more
Right.
cynical than Montgomery Clift could ever have been. Is
Yes.
there any truth that, God forbid, the role was Norma Desmond was offered to Mae West?
Yes. Can you imagine?
I can't.
That would again would be an entirely different film.
That talk about camp.
No. High camp.
I camp. She couldn't have played it.
No. We all lucked out with her, Gloria Swanson and with Bill Holden.
Did you get to know Mr. von Stroheim at all?
He was so interesting. He was very formal. And, we all had chairs with our names on the back. And he had been a very successful director years ago. And came back and he he would take his chair and bring it as close as he could to the camera to watch what Billy was doing. And I often wondered if Billy felt uncomfortable with that. And he was very formal. Good morning, Miss Olson. Good morning, Mr. von Stroheim. He was fascinated with this film. And he also was one of the people that understood that there was a classic beauty about this film and that we would never be forgotten.
That, and how right he was. And you've never been forgotten. While you were making it, did you have any sense of the power and majesty of the project you were working on? Or were you too busy trying to play your role?
I think a little of both.
A little of both.
I think that, first of all, there were about 14 or 15 films being shot on the lot all at the same time. And, you know, there were very important. Hal Wallace was a producer. William Wyler was a producer and director. Cecil B. DeMille. And everybody was shooting a film. And so at the end of the day, you'd finish shooting at 6 o'clock and they would show the dailies of the previous day. And the director and the photographer and the writer would show up just to see, did they capture exactly what they meant to and wanted to. And when their dailies were over, they'd leave. And when Sunset Boulevard started to be shown, people would begin to watch it. And pretty soon they wouldn't leave until they could see yesterday's dailies of Sunset Boulevard. And they had to bring in extra seats because there wasn't this immediate changing of people. They wanted to see, what did they do today or yesterday?
So the word was out early on that something special was happening.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
I think so. Took a little while, but
when,
eventually.
When you mentioned your first scene shot was the first scene you appear in the film, when you come into Sheldrake's office and talk about this terrible script, and the writer is right behind you. You said you would like to do that scene again, but it's perfection. It's perfection. As is, it's perfection.
I begged to do it again.
Why?
Because I felt I could have done it better. And once I got the gist of Billy and what his style and what he was doing, I just tried to do the best I could on the first take, and that was it.
Because he liked the first take. He wasn't one of the directors. Take after take after take.
You know, I will never forget the love scene on the balcony. We shot that at night on the balcony, and the camera was on one of those huge things, and Billy was up there, and down below we started shooting at we got to the studio at 6. We started shooting at 8 o'clock, so it was dark. It was nighttime, and down below there was tables and people and friends of Billy's and other actors, and I thought, oh my God, this is my love scene, and I have this huge audience down here. Anyway, that was difficult because we had to maneuver. We walked out and we had to have a certain separation, and then I turned my back and I say, you know, that my fiance wants me to join him, and I can't do it. Something has happened. And he says, what happened? Oh, I don't say happened, and he said, what happened? And I answer, you did.
Great line.
And that brought us into this embrace. And we never rehearsed the embrace. He just said, Bill, take Nancy in your arms and embrace as passionately as you both can. And do not separate. And say, he said, it may seem like a long time, but he said, I'm going to fade out and we're going to pull the camera back on the two of you. So he said, do not please disengage until I say cut. Well, we rehearsed and we get to the point of the embrace. And then he said, Nancy, you're a little bit to move to the left a little. Anyway, so we now get to it. They're shooting the first take. And there we are, and we embrace. I love to kiss Bill, by the way. I loved it. It made me feel lovely. He was a wonderful kisser. Anyway, it went on and on and on. And finally, there was a voice down below. And it said, cut! God damn it, cut! And it was Mrs. Holden. So it was a little bit of a setup. I think she was told that she could do that. And he had Bill and me, continuing this embrace. Anyway, I will never forget that.
Were you, Nancy Olson, attracted to William Holden?
I wasn't attracted to him. He was married. He had children. It wouldn't occur to me to ever be seriously attracted, but I liked him. We became really, really good friends, and we loved to embrace.
You made 3 other films together. Paramount thought of you as a wonderful couple.
Well, we did a lot
together.
Yes, we did 4 films, and we became very close, intimate friends. And every time we saw each other, we would immediately respond. I mean, I've written about the years after I was married for the second time to my real husband, Alan Livingston. And we were at the airport, we're coming in from LA to Kennedy and then changing planes to London. And Bill was coming in from Europe. So that anyway, we're walking down the hall ready to get into the next plane. And all of a sudden I hear this voice behind me saying, Nancy. And I turn around and it's Bill. And I said, Bill. And we started running toward each other. And we embrace and we kiss and we embrace. And we said, how are you? You're married again. Are you happy? Da, 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 da. And all of a sudden, a man who was walking by us, he tapped us on the shoulder and he said, excuse me, I just have to say this. This is better than watching an old movie. It's true story.
He had a front row seat. Let me ask, I know you and Billy Wilder were flown over to London for the premiere of the musical Sunset Boulevard. You're very tactful about it in the book, but what did you really think of it?
I was disappointed in it, and I think Billy's summed it up perfectly when he said it was like watching my movie in a permanent long shot. My first husband, Alan Lerner, the writer, lyricist and book writer, and he said, you don't go to a bookstore to buy a screenplay. You go to a bookstore to buy the great plays because they're part of literature. There's, Shakespeare and Moliere, and there's Tennessee Williams, and these are great writers. And it's all the feelings have to be expressed on stage. In the movie, you can just bring the camera up for a close-up, and the actor can have an expression of real devastation and sadness, and one tear coming down his or her cheek. and it says everything. You don't have
And
to
no
express it.
words. You don't have to have words. The film technique is
The camera tells the story. And that's why when you do a full scene, you do you do a long shot and you see everybody moving around. And then for the moments that are very special, you bring the camera in for a close up. And then the editor and the director put all that film together to make it long shot, close up. And the emphasis is in the close up.
And that's the language of film, and that can't be translated to another medium.
No.
But I thought there was another problem with the musical, or God forbid, of doing Sunset Boulevard today. I don't think there's anybody who could play Norma Desmond. Gloria Swanson could play her because she understood the language of silent movie acting. It was in her body. When I saw a number of actresses do the musical, but they were modern women. And when they tried to evoke the language of silent movies, it was superficial. With Gloria Swanson, it was deeply embedded.
I also think that movies have changed a great deal. Movie stars are not what they used to be. I don't quite understand it. I do not go to the movies as much as I used to. Partly because I stopped with COVID. I mean, that completely put me away from going into the theater. But also, movies are different.
They're different, and by and large, they're not as good. You're part of what's called the golden age, because it was a golden age. There's no movie today that can possibly have the power or the sustaining power of a Sunset Boulevard. I don't see it. Are we going to be here 74 years from now talking about some film of 2023? I doubt it.
I know.
I'll come back and check, but I doubt it. I want to get back to Sunset Boulevard, but I want to ask you about a film that I suspect you're never asked about, but I'm very interested in it. You say in the book, when you read the script, it was something you thought you shouldn't do and it wouldn't be remembered, but probably next to Sunset Boulevard, it's your most remembered film, but it's notorious. Big Jim McLean with John Wayne. It's not forgotten.
Well, that is ridiculous. It was not a great script.
No, it certainly wasn't. But
it was played over and over again, and it 1 o'clock in the morning, and people would say, "Oh, Nancy, I saw you in Big Jim McLean." And I thought, oh my God. But one of the reasons I did that film was because I wanted to get to know who was John Wayne. He was a classic figure of the 20th century and a dynamic movie star. And he was somewhat mysterious to me. And I thought it would be very interesting to find out and work with him. And it was interesting, by the way.
It was.
And we became great friends, by the way. He was never flirtatious, ever. But he was so friendly and wanted to be friends. And that was how lovely. And, but also there was a simmering anger underneath that I could never quite identify or understand. And as I've written, it came out at a moment when we were having a small dinner overlooking the sea, and it was lovely. And somebody brought up Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh,
we were talking about politics, and all of a sudden, John got up. Everybody called him Duke, but I called him John, and he never corrected me. John got up and literally was shaking. Shaking was such anger that it was like My God, are you all right? And he said, that goddamn cripple. That shocked me. But somewhere the anger he had, how he used his politics to release it.
And after all, Big Jim McLean is a very right-wing film.
Yes.
I suspect that the uninstructed viewer sees Nancy Olson and John Wayne and Big Jim McLean. Oh, she's as Republican and conservative as John Wayne. But nothing could be further from the truth.
No, I'm about as a Democrat as you can get, and always have been.
Did the politics of that film really gung-ho anti-communist? Stop you?
I hated it, and I thought nobody's ever going to see this film. This is not very good. But I will have an interesting experience in Hawaii, and I needed that in my life at that time.
So that's why you did it.
Yeah, that's why I did it.
But we haven't forgotten the film. It's sort of an important film. It represents the political point of view of a certain type of that period.
Oh, God help us.
When you get to a film called Battle Cry, you make a statement which really startled me. And you said, I realized at that point I really didn't want to do more film acting, and I told my agents not to send me out for any parts. I was shocked to read that.
Oh, I said that when I finished Sunset Boulevard and Mr. Music with Bing, and then another picture with Bill, Submarine Command, and then we did Union Station. None of this was released. And I married Alan Lerner and moved to New York. And I said to Paramount, I'd want to be a movie star. And they had a nervous breakdown when Sunset Boulevard came out, because then all of a sudden, I mean, there was such a demand. It's interesting.
But what was your resistance?
I was in my early 20s, just turned 21 when I did Sunset. And I was at the studio at 7 in the morning, sorry. Hair, makeup, on the set at 9, from 9 to 12, lunch 12 to 1, and then 1 to 6. I was with a wardrobe lady, a makeup man or woman, a hairdresser. And there was a life outside those big, huge sound stages that I was no longer a part of. And we worked 6 days a week then. I had 1 day off. And that was not a life for me. I needed to go out and meet people and have relationships and find out more about the world.
And yourself too, I guess.
Yes.
And yourself.
So when Alan Lerner said, he'd written Brigadoon, which was it's a masterpiece. And he lived in New York and knew everybody in the theater. And the theater was what really enticed me in the beginning. And I did 3 plays on Broadway, by the way, and that was a wonderful experience.
I tell them you did Tunnel of Love, Send Me No Flowers, and Mary Mary.
Oh, and Mary Mary was the best time I ever had in the theater, because it was written so beautifully, and it was comedy. It was Barbara Bel Geddes was the original, and she was really the star of that show. But then I got a call from the producer, who I forget his name, but he was a friend. He said, Nancy, Barbara is having a nervous breakdown in her life. She needs at least 2 months off. We don't want to break the huge hit that we have with somebody, just anybody, to replace her. We need somebody who has a name and a ambiance. And he said, if you could do 2 weeks of rehearsal with the original director and do 6 weeks on Broadway. He said, it would be a miracle for us if you would do that. And I said, okay, I would like it, because I was at a time in my life, which I write about, where it kind of was a life-saving project. I could focus on that. And
but
I had
Nancy,
a wonderful time.
Over the years, you said farewell to acting, but then you were enticed back.
Well,
You get
yes,
enticed back.
just only when I felt like, okay, I could use that now. But it wasn't something that I was not a Norma Desmond.
That wasn't, being on the screen wasn't something you needed to live, to survive.
No.
It wasn't that kind of a requirement for you.
But to be, by the way, with Alan Lerner in the middle of the most extraordinary period of the theater, you know, I don't know if it's okay for me to do this, but I want you to realize what the theater was really, how dynamic it was at that time. And I have written about visiting New York for the first time and excited. I was under contract to Paramount, and I called Paramount and said, I want to go to New York at the end of August, the first week in September, something like that. And I said, I'm going to stay at the Plaza Hotel, but you have to get me house seats for every night that I'm there. And I have a friend from California who's also going to be there, and he can take me. Okay, I just want you to understand what I saw in those 6 nights that I was going to be there. Okay, I arrived on a Saturday night and checked into the Plaza. And Sunday evening, George and I attended the Actors Benefit performance of South Pacific with Mary Martin and Ezio Pinza. I was enchanted. Monday night, we saw Death of a Salesman with Lee J. Cobb and Mildred Dunnick and Arthur Kennedy. I was stunned. Tuesday night, we went to a small theater on 44th Street and saw Where's Charlie? Ray Bolger delighting everyone as he sang Once in Love with Amy. Wednesday night, we saw Detective Story with Ralph Bellamy and the fresh young talent Lee Grant, creating the genius or revealing the genius of the actor's studio training. Thursday night, we saw A Streetcar Named Desire with Marlon Brando and Kim Hunter. I will still hear Marlon's plaintive wail. Stella. Friday night, we saw Mr. Roberts with Henry Fonda, David Wayne. I had no idea that someday I would do a play with David. Saturday night, our last night to attend the theater, it was Cole Porter's legendary musical, Kiss Me, Kate. The perfect note to which to end a thrilling first visit to New York. Just imagine that.
Imagine that and compare it to what's on now, but we won't go there because that's like talking about today's films compared to Sunset Boulevard.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I wanted to ask you had success very early on. You were 20 when you shot Sunset Boulevard?
20, I was going on 21.
So, and that was enormous success. You were Oscar nominated. You were in the company of William Holden, Gloria Swanson, Billy Wilder, Eric von Stroheim. You were fresh from Milwaukee. Did your parents give you enough confidence and sense of self that you could handle that kind of success at such an early age?
I think they must have. And I mean, I was not overly impressed with all that. I don't know why.
You were not overly, that's
I
why you could do it.
I was busy all my life. I mean, I was busy in school. I had extracurricular stuff that I was doing all the time. It was just a life. It was just my life. And making movies was very special, actually, of course, but it was isolating. It put you in a corner.
But you didn't feel, I don't deserve this. This shouldn't have happened to me. You never had that feeling. You were very lucky.
Well, I didn't
You're
say
also good.
I didn't say or feel that I was deserving, but I was always successful.
And you could handle it.
If I went, tried out for a play in high school, I got the lead.
After all these years, and I'm sure I know the answer, do you have any regrets about how you handled your career?
Yes, I'm sure. There are some parts that I played that I was not concentrated enough. And also, there were, if you make a lot of films, if one of them is outstanding, that's very good, because there's a very uneven feeling about films. Some have great moments and some, but the consistency of a great film is somewhat rare.
We start and we end with this. You were in one of the greatest films ever made.
Isn't that amazing?
And we're here talking to you after all these years. And can you share with us, what's your secret? We can add, it's 74 years. You were 20 when you did the film. What's your secret, Nancy Olson Livingston?
I would say I don't have a secret, but if you want my advice, if you're a young person and you're interested in the arts, is to pursue them. Learn what you can, participate as much as you can, and also get an education. It helps you portray all the characters that you're dealing with. If you know the history, the geography, the whole thing, it helps you it gives you the background. I was very musical and I won prizes playing the piano, but it was fun. I loved it.
But you've obviously kept interested in life all these years.
I'm afraid so, yes.
And one of the delightful things in this book is you do have some scores to settle.
I do have some what?
Scores to settle.
Well, I don't know about that. At this time in my life, I'm an old lady. And my scores that I haven't really settled will just have to be, it's okay.
But you obviously have a good attitude about living, or you wouldn't be flourishing the way you are at your age.
I tell you, writing this book has been a wonderful experience for me. And I started, when Alan Lerner died, and I wrote a letter to our two daughters. And then, by the way, I married Alan Livingston, who was then the president of Capitol Records. He had just signed the Beach Boys when we married. And he had been, by the way, at NBC television, and before that, and created Bonanza. I've written all about that. And before that, when he was in the Army, he came out and worked for Capitol, created Bozo the Clown and all kinds of wonderful children's albums, and then made Nat Cole a soloist. Nat was playing the piano with a trio. And he said he heard Nat sing a few phrases, and he said, "Nat, you are a soloist." Alan was brilliant, Alan Livingston. So was Alan Lerner.
You
I'm married to two Allens.
You married two brilliant Jewish
Yes.
man named
Yes.
Alan.
Yes.
And the
Who,
second
by the
husband
way,
was
were
the right
not the
husband.
least bit religious. They
Neither
never
one.
went to, I couldn't have married a religious person. I was baptized Lutheran by a very dedicated Lutheran grandfather. And he felt that I would go to hell if I were not baptized. So he arranged that. And that was fine with my parents. But we were not, my parents sent me to Unitarian Sunday school, which is a very, they call themselves Christians because they believe in the teachings of Christ, of Jesus, but they don't necessarily believe that Mary was a virgin. That's not part of it. So it's a different point of view. And both Alan Lerner and Alan Livingston, they never went to temple. They never celebrated a Jewish holiday. They loved Christmas because it was fun.
I would love to go on, and I'm sure everybody listening and people who watch on YouTube, I want to just mention again this delicious book, which is written by you. I hear your voice in the book. You as a writer, you have your own voice.
Yes.
You certainly have a wit, and you have a certain edge and a certain wit, and it's lively. It goes along, and then there's a certain dig, which I love, and then we go along again. But it has a sharpness from time to time, which is great. Love it.
You know,
I would be very suspicious of a writer who said, everybody I worked with always was just wonderful and marvelous. That's not the real world.
no. But by the way, Alan Livingston and I have a wonderful son, Christopher, who I could not have written the book without, because he's a wonderful writer himself. So he was so disciplined, and he gave me a direction all the time. He was fabulous and is fabulous. And I have 2 beautiful grandchildren that he's given me. And I have 3 beautiful grandchildren that Liza and Jenny Lerner have given me, and a new great grandson. So that's exciting.
That's exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On the book, on your career and your life. I'm being selfish. Magda, can we open it to a question or two from the house rather than going to the chat? Magda?
Yes, I think there are a few questions.
You have to speak up. I'm sorry, you're
Oh,
far
I'm sorry.
away.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Eddie, I'm sorry.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay, was it
I'll
odd that
repeat the
Doris,
question.
the question is, was it odd that Doris Day starred in the film version of your first 2 Broadway plays, The Tunnel of Love and Send Me No Flowers?
It's something about Tunnel of.
Was it odd that Doris Day starred in the film versions of the 2 plays that you were in?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I know that she did,
Yes.
but it didn't occur to me that, well, she was a comedian and a very gifted one.
Very, yeah.
And these were roles that would fit her perfectly.
Okay, the next question, and it's from Victoria Wilson. Please ask Nancy about what she came to know about Bill Wilder, working with him and watching him work, and ask about John Seitz, S-E-I-T-Z.
John,
You sound like you're so far away.
Oh,
what did you learn about Billy Wilder and John Seitz?
John Sykes?
S-E-I-T-Z. Do you know that name?
I don't place him.
No. Okay.
Sorry, but Billy Wilder was an unusual human being. He had a soul, and he was a bitter realist. He had his mother and his grandmother were killed in Auschwitz. So he had a view of the world that was very unique, and a personal experience of the world that gave him a particular view And he was not sentimental in the slightest. He was very much a realist. And he had a kind of distance of viewing things. He was not emotionally there involved.
But that
He
helped as the director, right? That distance.
Yes, absolutely. He had a real sense of reality of what he was shooting. He didn't fool himself. It was either working or it wasn't. And he made the best of it.
Could you
Okay.
feel about him that there had been tragedy in his life?
Yes. Because he didn't have an immediate emotional response to something that perhaps I would. He had a distance. So that if something happened to his dog that he loved, he would have a certain reality when the dog left the world. It was interesting. He was definitely different. But I enjoyed him very much. He had a tremendous sense of humor, by the way.
I was going to ask because the lines are so funny. Yet
Yeah.
that humor came out. John Seitz was the man who shot Sunset Boulevard. He was the cinematographer.
Oh, he was a cinematographer. Oh, he was great. And he was so cooperative and understood that I was kind of learning. And he was lovely.
Okay. What is your favorite of the 5 Disney films? How was it working with Walt Disney?
Oh, I loved what I did at Disney. I did, I had not worked for 8 years, and I got a call from Walt Disney in Mallorca. And he said, Nancy, he said, I'm sorry to interfere with your vacation, but he said, we're doing this new film at Pollyanna. And he said, every character, and he listed all Carl Malden and Agnes Moorehead and Jane Wyman and down the list. And he said, we want you. And I said, well, when are you shooting this? He said, when are you coming back? I said, I'm coming back tomorrow. And I'm going to spend the month of August in California because my father had retired and was now living in Brentwood. So I always took a little suite with my 2 children, my 2 little girls and their governess. And we spent the month of August there. And he said, well, we're shooting in the middle of August. He said, you'll be probably shooting till the second week in September. I said, it's okay. It's going to fit in. The children will go back and go start school and I can finish up with the movie. Anyway, Pollyanna is a delightful film, and it was a delightful experience. And then a year later, he called me, the studio called me and said, we're doing The Absent-Minded Professor with Fred MacMurray. All these leading men, by the way, that I was working with were like 30 years older than I. This was ridiculous. Anyway, Fred MacMurray is a very special talent, very interesting man and performer. He was just so right on, sensitive to every minute. And anyway, it was in August. Perfect. So I went and I did that, and I never had as nice a time. Disney Studios and Disney were totally different than I'd worked at Paramount. I worked at MGM. I worked at Warner Brothers. No, Disney, it was like, those were big cities. Disney was a small town. You had, when you walked on the lot, everybody knew everybody. everybody called Mr. Disney Walt. He insisted on it. The grips up on the scaffolding. Hi, Walt. And he was a genius. He was a Republican. And that was interesting to me because his films portrayed something that I felt was a little different. Anyway, he truly made a tremendous contribution to motion pictures. I mean, nobody really understood cartoons, but he did. If you go to by the way, to the museum in San Francisco, the Disney Museum, you get his early career and his creation of Mickey Mouse. And you realize how brilliant he was. And then I remember one of the first films I ever saw growing up was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I don't think I've ever been as enchanted with anything quite the same. It was, and Pinocchio and Snow White. These were extraordinary films.
And Alice in Wonderland.
Oh,
okay. Just to wrap it up, it's such a pleasure. We could listen to you for hours here. Can you just talk about the Lambs Club, your memory of it, and Alan Lerner?
well,
Did you know how they met? Just a little bit about it. And we'd love
yes.
to
Well,
have you come to New York.
the Lambs Club was probably one of the most important groups in the city of New York for Alan Lerner. When Alan graduated from Harvard, he had done a number of the Hasty Pudding shows, but he needed a partner. He was not a composer, and he wanted to do musicals. And he visited the Lambs Club, and Frederick Lowe was called Fritz. Fritz played the organ at Radio City Music Hall. That was one of his making a living things that he did. And he played the piano at the Lambs Club. And that's where they met. And Alan said to him, have you ever, because, by the way, Fritz Lowe played the piano like no one I have ever heard. He won, when he grew up in Germany, he won the very serious, it has the name, award for his concert interpretations of the great classics. And he heard every nuance, every key change. It was just, a pleasure to listen to him play the piano. And Alan Lerner understood that the moment he began hearing it. And he asked, would you be interested? And they wrote a musical review. And Brooks Atkinson, who was a great drama critic of the New York Times then, said, it doesn't quite work. However, these two young men, there is a promise of something wonderful coming. So that inspired them to do the musical The Day Before Spring, which ran about 9 months and was sold to MGM but never made. And then they wrote Brigadoon, which Brigadoon is probably, if you listen to the score, it is simply, it's
Glorious.
just
Glorious.
beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Well, the Lambs benefits from the Brigadoon.
I had never attended the Lambs, but I heard about it all the time from Fritz and Alan, and how important it was for them to have them meet there, because I don't think they would have anywhere else.
So it's perfect that you come to speak to the Lambs tonight, having, after all, been connected to Alan J. Lerner. We also have to say that Mr. Lerner dedicated My Fair Lady to you.
Yes. He did Paint Your Wagon. That's the first musical they did with me. And Royal Wedding, the movie.
The movie.
And then he did My Fair Lady. And that was truly, that it's a work of art. There's a benefit of George Bernard Shaw's script, but the score is simply fantastic. And he magically dedicated it to me. And then because they felt that Fair Lady put a period on what had been written in the musical theater. And so their next project was Gigi, which is, to me, that's my favorite score. But they decided that it should be an original film, not a theater piece. And that was interesting too. But it's an incredible movie and beautiful.
Fabulous.
Beautiful score.
Fabulous.
And then they were beginning to, Ellen was reading The Once and Future King about King Arthur and the Round Table. And he was beginning to think about Camelot, and we were divorced. But I kind of felt that I had been living with him during the apex of his career. I mean, those were the stellar works.
And I don't know if you're aware, Lowe left a piece of Brigadoon to the Lambs because they met at the club. We still get royalty checks. The Lambs get royalty checks. And we're hoping that'll come back to Broadway, so the Lambs will benefit by it. But I'd like to extend an invitation to you if you come to New York to be our guest at the Lambs. We would love to have you there.
I would love to come to New York and visit the Lambs Club, but I'm afraid I never will. I'm not traveling anymore.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a special evening. And this is going to be playing a lot because we put it on YouTube, and it's just a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nancy Olson. Thank you so much.
And
thank you.
Wonderful to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.